Along the riverbanks of Central and Eastern Europe, particularly along the Dnieper and Desna rivers in modern Ukraine and Russia, archaeologists have uncovered something truly spectacular. Enormous piles of woolly mammoth bones, dating to the end of the last ice age between roughly 14 to 20,000 years ago. Just one of these structures can contain the remains of at least 30 mammoths, and sometimes many more. These have often been interpreted as the remains of houses. It's probably one of the most iconic images of life in the Ice Age. But do we actually know that? The woolly mammoth is definitely the most famous of all the Ice Age megafauna. They've been extinct for about 5,000 years, but I went to the zoo to visit their closest living relative. Zoo, look at this beautiful animal right here. The Asian elephant. Closest living relative of the woolly mammoth. What a pretty lady. Woolly mammoths and Asian elephants last shared a common ancestor about 6 million years ago, which coincidentally is about the same time we had our last common ancestor with chimpanzees. That's totally irrelevant to the video, but that's a cool thing we have in common. Over those 6 million years, they evolved many adaptations to life in a cold environment. Smaller ears, a hump to store fat reserves, a shaggy coat made up of different layers of fur, and just loads of different genetic mutations connected to metabolism and things like that. We know a lot about mammoth DNA because so many have been found almost perfectly preserved in the permafrost. They really were so well adapted to life on the cold, grassy steppe. Humans obviously find that a much harsher environment. We can live in cold places, but we really have to adapt our lifestyles. For Paleolithic people, the hunting of mammoths was one of those adaptations. It was essential for their survival. The killing of just one of them could probably feed your community for several weeks.
So they really did build, pretty much a whole economy around killing mammoth. That's what they did.
That's archaeologist Natasha Reynolds, friend of the channel, expert in Paleolithic Europe, and author of a recent paper on these enormous piles of mammoth bones. Clearly, mammoths played an important role in the diet of Paleolithic people in the Eurasian steppe, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Stefan, I want a healthy and nutritious diet, but I don't have mammoth humps to chew on. Well, fear not, because this video is sponsored by AG1. Yes, I know, it's time for the sponsored segment. Don't skip. If they didn't sponsor me, I wouldn't be able to do any of this stuff. I've been drinking AG1 in the morning for about a month now. New year, new me. It couldn't be easier. You just mix 1 scoop with 8 to 12 ounces of water, shake it up, bosh, drink it. It tastes great. It's got like pineapple and vanilla in it. Super good. Doesn't taste as green as it looks, honestly. It tastes really good. But basically, I've ditched coffee. It just doesn't agree with me anymore. It makes me so jittery, makes my tummy feel funny. I just felt so sluggish in the mornings. Didn't have any pep in my step. But AG1's a great replacement, honestly. Get energy, focus. I don't have a crash afterwards at like some point in the afternoon. It's got 75 vitamins and whole food sourced ingredients. Third party tested for quality. Made in New Zealand, g'day. Give it a try. Give it a try. I think you'll like it. I like it. And if you go to drinkag1.com/Stefan Milo, you get a year's supply of vitamin D and K and 5 travel packs, which is super convenient. Replace your morning mammoth hump. Replace your morning mammoth hump, with Drink AG1.
So these structures are found at maybe 7 or 8 sites in what's now Russia and Ukraine. And at each site, you can have several structures. The oldest series of structures is found at Kuznetsov, Kuznetsov 11. There's many sites at Kuznetsov. So this is specifically Kuznetsov 11, and that's the easternmost site, and it's also the oldest site. So that one dates to about 25,000 years ago.
Kuznetsov 11 is the largest mammoth structure found so far. It's 12.5 meters across, and contains the remains of at least 64 mammoths, judging from the number of crania archaeologists recovered. Which is just an astounding number of mammoths, isn't it? That's a lot of mammoths. Natasha's latest research paper focuses on the site of Udinova, though. The structures here are younger, about 18,000 years old. They're smaller too, but they are not less impressive. Between the 5 structures at Udinova, it is estimated that they are made up of 129 mammoths. It really shows just how expert people in the Paleolithic were at hunting these enormous animals. One of the big challenges with interpreting these sites is that it's very hard to say how long they took to build up. Our dating methods aren't accurate enough to say whether this was one massive event or, for example, if each structure was built up over a hunting season.
Yeah, I reckon it's basically a hunting season. One of the things we did was to look at just how much meat is represented in these structures. If you make certain assumptions based on how much meat there is in a mammoth, and then how much meat a person eats. If you're assuming that there might have been 100 people, just, for the sake of arguments, at the site at one time, the amount of mammoth meat represented in each of the structures, certainly the larger ones, is enough to keep 100 people going for months. Months at a time. I mean, you can't be very specific about it because there's a lot of assumptions involved. We also don't know if, for example, they might have been processing meat to preserve it and then to remove it from the site. We don't know if there might have been a lot more than 100 people there. There might have been 200, 300, I don't know.
What we can say is that between roughly 14,000 and 20,000 years ago, seemingly quite large groups of humans were gathering along the river valleys of modern Russia and Ukraine, hunting large numbers of mammoths, and afterwards they were deliberately arranging the bones into these structures. Okay, check this out. This is the wall of a mammoth enclosure at Mezirich, modern Ukraine. Look at these jawbones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 jawbones. That's not even all of them. Look at this photo. The whole wall of this enclosure is made up of mammoth jawbones. It's incredible. You can see other bones placed in the middle of the enclosure here. It's just fantastic. It's just absolutely fantastic. One incredible thing to find as an archaeologist. It doesn't get any better than that. That's for sure. There is absolutely no question that these mammoth enclosures were man-made. But the big question is, why were they doing it? Are these houses or something else entirely different? I can't even imagine digging that up.
So this history of interpreting these mammoth bone structures as dwellings goes back to archaeology in the Soviet Union, where there was a lot of emphasis on the identification and studying of dwelling structures in the Paleolithic archaeological record. One of the reasons for this is to do with the nature of the archaeological record in that part of the world, where you have these amazingly preserved open-air sites within loess sequences, which allows us as archaeologists now to go back and see how people were living, in the great outdoors. What kind of sites were they building? What kind of sites were they leaving behind them in the open landscape?
In Western Europe, a lot of archaeological sites from this Upper Paleolithic, from the end of the Ice Age, are cave sites. They preserve stuff in amazing detail, but we don't have much idea about how people lived outside of these caves. In the vast expanse of grassland and plains that make up Eastern Europe, there are very few caves, so these open-air mammoth sites provide the best shot archaeologists have at understanding the late Paleolithic here.
On a more theoretical, intellectual level, this is something that Soviet archaeologists were very proud of their specialism in, because they wanted to study social structures. They wanted to study the evolution of social life, throughout prehistory. So the identification of these dwelling structures was a really important part of that.
The interpretation of these mammoth bone structures as houses has been pretty widely accepted for a long time. If you bought my children's book on archaeology, #bestbookever, you'll find them portrayed as houses. If you Google mammoth bone structures, you'll see these really dramatic reconstructions of these buildings as houses. But Natasha and her colleagues prefer a different explanation. They view them as ritualized middens. Basically, the hunter-gatherers are disposing of these mammoth remains in a way that is ritualistically aligned with their worldview. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know. Bloody archaeologists and ritual. But let me just defend archaeology for a moment here. The first thing to say here is that humans obviously do have a ritual aspect to our lives. You could maybe call it an irrational part of our makeup. We all have it, absolutely every one of us. People in Paleolithic Europe were no exception, and the mammoth played an important role in their rituals. This is the Vogelherd mammoth, an absolutely incredible piece of Paleolithic art, 40,000 years old-ish. Is it a children's toy? An icon? Something else? We'll never know. This is another fantastic piece of Paleolithic cave art, a woolly mammoth from the walls of Rouffignac Cave in France. It's got their shaggy fur, enormous tusks, the hump on their back. It literally looks like it could have been drawn yesterday. I love it. And perhaps most dramatically of all, the Shungir burials. 3 individuals buried 35,000 years ago, an adult and 2 children, buried with thousands upon thousands of mammoth ivory beads, 16 ivory spears. It's an incredibly elaborate burial. Maybe even the most elaborate Paleolithic burial. Definitely a contender. You can't help but wonder what singled out these people for such special treatment. Anyhow, the point is, Paleolithic people had ritual lives, and the mammoth played an important role in that. I know that you know that Paleolithic people had ritual lives, but Natasha's argument doesn't just depend on that kind of obvious point. There are specifically some physical features of these structures that would be kind of strange if they were houses.
The key feature, I think, in the identification of a Paleolithic dwelling structure, in my mind, is the presence of a hearth. To me, if it's not got a hearth in it, I don't think you can call it a dwelling structure. I don't think you can have lived and slept inside any kind of structure during this part of the Ice Age without having a fireplace.
At Udinova, 3 of the 5 structures don't have any hearths at all. And in one of the structures, the possible hearth butts directly into the wall. You could interpret it as a hearth to keep people warm, but maybe they were also burning bones as a part of creating these structures. There are hearths outside of these structures, and there are burnt bones inside of the structures, so it's not a matter of them not having access to resources, not having access to wood. They can make fire. They're just choosing not to do it in these supposed houses. There are other mammoth structures at other sites which have hearths, but it's sporadic. There isn't a clear pattern. Some structures have hearths inside, some outside, and some sites have no hearths at all, which is odd for a home in the Ice Age, I would say. I've been thinking, everyone. I have been thinking about the literal structure of these buildings as houses and how that interpretation might be kind of difficult. Let's think about this for a second. There are sort of 4 problems I can think of. First is that these mammoth structures vary in size. Now that's easy to explain if they're middens, because some hunts are more successful than others. Some hunting seasons are more successful than others. There might have been other factors at play that resulted in them needing or hunting less mammoths. If they're houses, then some sort of interpretations about social standing or something like that might creep into play. It's just harder to explain. It's not as neat to explain. Connected to that, problem number 2. Let's look at Udinova. 5 structures, 120-ish mammoths killed. It's going to take time to accumulate that many mammoths, right? That's probably not going to be hunted in one day. So what are these people living in whilst these structures are being made? They're probably living in a structure made of skins or something like that, which is what modern hunter-gatherers, modern Siberians, literally like one adult mammoth is going to come with like a house-sized piece of fur. So why go to the effort of building something out of bones? Be quiet, Crow. Third problem. Is it really the easiest thing to build a house out of mammoth bones? If you look at a reconstruction like this here, you can see all the bones around the outside. You can see the bones on the roof. Is that the easiest thing to build? When these things are reconstructed and put in a museum, I'm positive they have lots of discrete screws and wires keeping these bones in place. So it would be hard to keep them upright, you think. All those bones on the roof, that'd be so hard. Now, obviously, when these buildings are excavated, when they're not found like that, with their roof intact. There are bones in the middle of these structures. If you take a look at some of Natasha's photos from Udinova, you can see the amount of interior space is very small. It's like enough for one person to lie down in. People who favor this interpretation of them as houses argue that the bones in the interior were on the roof and they fell down. And that's why the interior space is so small. That's why there are big bones in the interior. But do we actually know that? How do we know the bones in the interior aren't exactly where they're meant to be? Aren't in the exact position that these prehistoric hunter-gatherers wanted them to be in?
So the fact that at Udinova you have bones found towards the center of these accumulations that appear to be in situ, in that the bones were left in quite complex and quite deliberate ways. So like the tusks of the part of the skull with the tusks might all be like facing down, and all in a circle facing each other, that kind of thing that you can find towards the middle of the accumulations. That's not at all consistent with the idea that there was a dwelling structure that then collapsed.
Look at this. This is really cool. This is a great example, I think, of what Natasha was talking about. This is a mammoth skull found on the exterior of Udinova Structure 3. Inside, in between its tooth, was this mammoth ivory pendant, found right in between the teeth in this mammoth's jaw, face, cranium. Could that be accidental? Maybe. But that's not the only interesting thing they found from there. This right here, this lump here, is a piece of coral that was found inside the cavity of a mammoth's face after they had removed the tusk. This piece of coral was put inside there. These shells were gathered from the Black Sea region and were placed in between the vertebrae of another mammoth. And we have these other artifacts too, found alongside the remains of these mammoths.
So all these kind of quite special objects which were left in with them. So it's not just regular kitchen waste. It's not just regular rubbish from off of the site.
You wouldn't expect all of these things if these bones had fallen into their position accidentally, right? It seems like people are caring about their placement and are putting stuff in amongst these bones. Now, that doesn't mean that this wasn't their houses as such. People can care a lot about their houses. People care a great deal about their houses. But it does sort of push back on this idea that the bones are in the position they are now because they've fallen into that position. How do we know that they're not in the exact place that these hunters wanted them to be in? The last thing I'll mention about the structures at Udinova is that there is some evidence that they were covered up, that they were buried.
The reason why we think that they were covered in sediment is that there's very little gnawing or weathering of the bones. apart from it, some of the extremities of the bones, which might have been sticking out of the structures after they'd been covered with sediments.
If they were covered, then the bones are very likely in their original position and probably weren't houses. Walking in the woods, thinking about mammoths, thinking about prehistoric people. I hope you can hear me over the stream. We've had a lot of snow and ice. It's super flooded. One of the challenges, right, with interpreting big monuments like this in the past, in prehistory, is that it's so difficult to escape our current viewpoint, our current lifestyle, where we're just not living alongside mammoths, we're not hunting for survival, we're not living a life that has a lot in common with these ancient people. We have some things in common because we're all humans, but our lifestyles have changed so much, and it's hard to get out of that perspective. This is where ethnography comes in, the study of people who are living at least a somewhat more similar lifestyle. And one fantastic example of ritual disposal of animal remains comes from the Evenki in modern Russia.
The bear ritual exists in a number of different versions in the Evenkian culture. In the northern part of our area, the following version is still in use. The dead bear is addressed grandfather or grandmother, among other names, and the hunters tell the bear that they didn't kill it. The bones and the skull are buried on a platform, called a dalkin or besides a tulkin, similar to a traditional human burial structure in this area. This structure can be placed on the kill site or close to the settlement. There can be several bears on such a platform, but they cannot be deposited together with other animals. In the southern part of the northern Transbaikal, the area around Kalar village, they've never used platforms, but formally buried the skull of the bear under a heap of stones with the face against the ground, so that it could not see who killed it.
What a fantastic ritual. The disposal of the bear remains with an equal level of respect to human remains in the same mounds. The deliberate positioning of the skull so that the bear didn't know who killed it. And they all deny that they were the ones that killed the bear for whatever reason. The people on the Mammoth Steppe, Paleolithic Eurasia, they could have been doing the exact same thing as these people. Disposing of mammoths in a way that was significant to them, positioning the skulls in a way that was significant to them, depositing goods and gifts amongst the remains, perhaps as a way to give back to the mammoth, which was just absolutely essential to their survival. There's every possibility that these mounds are ritual structures. Look at this waterfall. This water is raging at the minute. Hope you can hear me. Were the ones with central hearths houses? Were some of them houses? Some of them ritual structures? It's hard to say, it's hard to say. At the minute, we don't have the evidence. I would say it is unknown at the moment. Unknown. Look at that. The title of the show comes back at the end. Gosh, professionalism, absolute professionalism. Thank you for watching, everyone. Boop. Thank you for watching the first episode of Unknown at the Moment. My humble attempt at reclaiming mystery and intrigue from pseudoscience, pseudo-archaeology, looking at really interesting questions from archaeology and human evolution with the scientists who are actually trying to answer these questions. Super excited for it. This question of what these mammoth mounds were is probably going to remain unknown for a very long period of time because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. No more work is really going on in this area at the minute and for the foreseeable future. I'm going to be donating $1,000 to a suitable Ukrainian charity to give back a little bit. I don't know. Loads more exciting videos on archaeology, prehistory, human evolution to come. It's going to be great.